Good evening. I am Webster Griffin Tarpley, PhD, speaking to you from Washington, D.C. I have been asked by Daniela Walls, the chairwoman of the Tax Wall Street Party, to issue an immediate comment in response to a very important speech made in Athens by Professor Kostas Lapavitsas, a member of the Greek parliament in the Chamber of Deputies from the Syriza party and a leading member of the left platform faction. And he addressed an international conference in Athens just in the past 48 hours. I would like to call attention to this speech. And again, the Tax Wall Street Party of the United States regards this as the most advanced programmatic statement which has come out of Europe in recent days. So first of all, let me call your attention to this speech. It has been posted on the internet, and you can find it if you look it up under Kostas Lapavitsas in the last 48 hours. Now, let's just focus first of all on what is so special about this. This is the solid basis for Greece to leave the euro if and when that becomes necessary. And Professor Lapavitsas thinks it's necessary right now, and I'm inclined to agree with him. In order to leave the euro and return to the drachma, what do you have to do? Well, the Lapavitsas plan includes, and my own plan includes, a default on the national debt. I would actually formulate that as a comprehensive debt moratorium on all forms of international debt, be it government debt, the debt of private corporations, if necessary, and every other kind of international debt. And it's a debt moratorium, uniform and orderly. It is the weapon of the poor, as Professor Lapavitsas says. At the same time, he talks about and calls for the nationalization of the entire banking system, pointing out that in Greece, the individual commercial banks already have majority shares from the government. And he goes on to talk about the nationalization of the central bank, the Bank of Greece, which he would then run with civil servants and technocrats, with the private functionaries being rejected. Now, under emergency conditions, that is undoubtedly necessary. I thought of it in terms of an interministerial committee of the prime minister, the finance minister, and the economics minister. However, the ultimate goal would be to make the operations of the Greek central bank into those of a national bank, a Hamiltonian national bank, in other words, directed by public laws, by the Greek parliament, saying what kinds of credit should be put out, to whom, at what interest rate, with what maturities. He also calls for comprehensive capital controls to be enacted. So I think those three important elements, or four, to declare a debt moratorium, to nationalize the commercial banking system, to nationalize the central bank, and to maintain and indeed expand the scope of capital controls, those are absolutely critical elements. Now, I have ventured myself to contribute a plan of this type, which I guess I've called mine the economic self-defense of Greece. And this is available at tarpley.net for those who want to read it in English, but also on the leading Greek website, Nostimonimar. Nostimonimar has this, I think, displayed so you can find it without too much problem. Now, I would then like to go on, after congratulating Professor Lapavitsas for this contribution. I want to give some ideas, perhaps, to develop this further. In many cases, these are simply extensions of the ideas that Lapavitsas has put forward. However, we have very little time, as he stresses, and therefore, I think it might be important to try to push these ideas as far as we can in the direction of their development. Now, the first thing I guess I have to mention is he goes out of his way to say that the current situation is in no way comparable to Russia after the Peace of Brest-Litovsk. Now, he doesn't mention me, but I think he's responding to some things that I've written about this. You'll recall that Brest-Litovsk, of course, was this treaty in early 1918 by which Russia, Lenin and Trotsky, and other heroes of many leftists at least, gave away 1/3 of their country. They had to. It was a necessary retreat. There was no way around it. And history has been rather kinder to them than the people who complained about it and didn't really have a serious alternative. Bukharin being one of those with his phantom of revolutionary guerrilla warfare for which the preconditions simply did not exist. The problem of whether the current forced capitulation, sure, capitulation to the Eurogorks, to Merkel and Schäuble and Draghi and Juncker and the rest of them. The question of whether that's Brest-Litovsk or not is yet to be determined. We're now in the area of subjectivity. It's going to be up to people like Professor Lapavitsas to say whether this time is used. You'll remember that in the case of Brest-Litovsk, the interlocutor, the oppressor, the German government, collapsed within about 7 months into revolution. And one of the reasons there was a revolution, by the way, was that the Bolsheviks used that time, especially through their Berlin embassy, which came into existence and continued to exist for most of that year. Thanks to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, they were able to foment the formation of the KPD, right, the German Communist Party. So maybe this entire question has to be reposed once again. I think I'm also the source on this idea that you can nationalize a central bank using tanks. Sometimes that is necessary, even though, as Professor Lapavitsas says, it's not the optimum way to do it. But I think we have to get down to a deeper level. I would say that the roots of the present difficult situation lie in the fact that Greece attempted a frontal attack on the Eurogorkical institutions as one small country against the 19 of the Eurozone, several of them quite large, and indeed against the 28 of the entire European Union. It would have been better to assemble a coalition. It would have been better to obtain allies. Maybe those allies were nowhere to be found 6 months ago, but there's some reason to think that they may now emerge. I find that Professor Lapavitsas is altogether too pessimistic in repeatedly trying to convince his audience that there can be no victories inside the euro, that resistance inside the euro is simply not possible, and that playing for time is essentially futile. I don't think that's true at all. And the possibilities include, first of all, that friendly governments could emerge in Spain with Podemos, in Portugal with the Bloco de Izquierda. I noticed that the professor seems to dismiss Podemos out of hand. Certainly the leadership is inferior to that of Syriza, but nevertheless, some changes might be possible there, right, in the crucible of future events. Therefore, I think it's important to say that possible allies on the level of EU governments could emerge. There's also the possibility of a further development of parties and movements around the world, some of which might conceivably take power, that would be friendly to Syriza. One of my questions is, why not consider the formation of a Syriza International? That is to say, groups of parties and other political organizations that would be favorable to this, which would become lobbying groups, pressure groups, and otherwise do things to support Greece. International support is possible. There's also the question of international diversions, we might say, with Ukraine on the brink of default, insolvency, and so forth. The entire world of finance system seems to be more and more unstable, and that opens possibilities. If many countries begin defaulting, then Greece can do so with much less risk. So I would recommend those things. And let me just sum them up. Consider a Syriza International. Consider a world anti-austerity conference with all the authorities and activists from around the world. And why not have a summit of anti-austerity states, those that consider themselves to be sympathetic, aligned with the Syriza program and the spirit of what is being done in Greece, and make a great noise about this. The question of morality, which he addressed at the end, I think that morality can be quite effective. If you're going to make an appeal to German public opinion or Dutch or Finnish public opinion, one of the ways you want to do that is to show the atrocious, horrendous human suffering generated by austerity. That works, I think, also here in the United States. So don't wait for any of this, but push it forward. The goal here is not consistency. Consistency is not much that we can work with. The goal, of course, is victory as soon as possible. Now, the problem with opposing Prime Minister Tsipras on this package is that the only basis for a responsible vote against Tsipras at this time would be to have the alternative ready, not even to describe an alternative theoretically. I try to do that, others try to do that. But you'd have to be able to say, we have everything ready. Ready. What has to be ready? Well, quite a few hundreds of billions of drachmas have to be ready. You've also got to have teams. You've got to have technicians and civil servants who can go into the Greek central bank and who can run it, this time now as a national bank, not just serving banks, but serving the needs of the entire economy and the labor force. So you've got to have all of that ready. And those people have got to be able to distinguish between productive investment in industry, agriculture, infrastructure, mining, and other areas. Tourism, I guess we have to add to that in the case of Greece. Recreation, socially necessary, at least, can distinguish between that and purely parasitical financial speculation, of which there's already enough and which doesn't need to be subsidized. So the whole method of seizing the central bank revolves around 0% or very close to 0% financing, very long maturities, and a rigorous limitation to what is productive. So it would have been advantageous if the left platform had been ready this past week with the alternative. And I understand that may have been blocked by other factions. If the Syriza Economics Commission was not effective, then it would have been important to create a think tank, to get some university people and others involved. So that would have to be done now. As long as you're in the euro, you're in the euro, and you've got to organize support in those other euro countries. Now, once you're out, and that almost happened this past week, you've got to be ready with the drachmas. So in the past week, it was either capitulate to the demands or go to the prepared fallback position. Since the fallback position had, for whatever reason, not been prepared, it would have been irresponsible to take the plunge. And at that point, I don't see what the no to Tsipras means. If this is going to happen anyway, is it simply a matter of individual honor? would it not be better to keep the phalanx intact, the shield wall together, and if a retreat is necessary, the main thing about a retreat is let it be an orderly retreat. Let it be a step backwards, but keeping your units together. The other problem, of course, is that the Greeks, according to most polls, still consider the euro to be a factor of safety. It's going to take more education, more propaganda to address that. The other thing I think that Professor Lapavitsas ought to perhaps recognize more. Tsipras has now got some very important achievements. He has successfully played the U.S. against Germany, Lou against Schäuble. I believe that has some reality. He has successfully damaged the French-German axis, which has been the basis of all decision making. He has created at least the nucleus of a European front against the German concept of austerity with Italy and France. And he has gotten the International Monetary Fund and Draghi of the European Central Bank to talk about debt relief. He has also weakened Merkel in the sense that she now lost 60 to 65 votes, about 1/5 of her entire faction voted against her. Every time Merkel has to go back to the Bundestag, her situation becomes weaker and weaker. I think it would be good for Syriza to have a plan, maybe not publicly announced, to oust Merkel, to knock her out of the government and take Schäuble with her, right, for the remakes of the Grumpy Old Men series. Next one has now been announced. So get allies and consider these questions. Now, the other thing is the functioning of the nationalized central bank. I think it would be important to go into this and to start talking about production and jobs. My quick review of the Greek economy, and I'm certainly looking for people who know more about it. It looks to me like the need for new productive jobs in the Greek economy is something like 2 million new productive jobs. Now that would be unemployed, underemployed, diaspora, and other people who might like to enter the workforce. I believe it is important to go into the functioning of the nationalized central bank. And once again, very low interest rates, approaching zero, at zero as much as possible. And when we get to the great works of infrastructure in particular, things that are going to last 100 years, well, why not have a 100-year maturity so you'd be paying off minimal and manageable debt payments every year. It seems to me that Greece needs to go to indicative planning, not the Gosplan system, but the indicative planning system, which would allow you then to develop plans for public investment, as Professor Lapavitsas mentioned. I would, however, spell it out. 2 million jobs is something that people can understand. Other than that, Greece is obviously a great power in the area of merchant marine. Those ships have got to be kept modernized. There will be competitive challenges, inevitably, from China and others. Those will have to be addressed and overcome. Shipbuilding is probably the most obvious way to keep the current dominant position of the Greek merchant marine. So why not make shipbuilding into a national project with this cheap credit from the nationalized Bank of Greece? Tourism obviously needs to be modernized. There's an entire area of light industry. We can also think of regional development plans, starting from the fact that the first ports that one encounters in the Mediterranean coming west from Suez, Thessalonica, and Piraeus. And in each case, it looks like you need enhanced freight rail, enhanced superhighways, enhanced facilities, port docks, dry docks, and container facilities. All of that would enjoy the possible 0% credit. In order to do this, you've obviously got to husband your foreign exchange very carefully. you've got to make sure that you're using in-country resources. And therefore, I think a census of available in-country resources that could be mobilized, labor and raw materials, would be in order. One area where it's almost always possible for a small country to improve the productivity of labor is housing. So why not propose several million housing units for Greece to essentially solve that problem for the relevant historical future ahead? That also then means quite a few jobs in the housing and construction sector. So why not get specific about these things and talk about how this can be done so that you'd be counteracting the demagogy of the Eurogharks and the pro-Euro Greek oligarchy, as Professor Lapavitsas said. I think also it is probably impossible to avoid serious dislocations during the transitional period. Argentina gives some examples. It's going to be necessary to have barter deals with various countries outside of the IMF, outside of the World Trade Organization, and everything else. And you're going to have stockpiles. Stockpiles of raw materials and food. Those should be built up now to the extent that it's possible to do it. The other question about going back to the drachma is self-defense against derivatives, right? The old drachma never really had to coexist with a full-fledged array of derivatives. The old euros began to be phased out 1999, at least in theory. It was not until the year 2000 that President Clinton, in a foolish or criminal action, decided to deregulate derivatives. So after that, of course, we had the direct march to the crash of 2008 based on those derivatives. So what you're going to have to do is ban things like credit default swaps in particular, but also collateralized debt obligations, options, futures, indices, and things like this. Some can be banned, some can be taxed using a Wall Street sales tax or Tobin tax, but the special question of defending the new drachma against credit default swaps in particular is going to be a very big one, and Greece will have to be proactive on that and take a forward position, attempting to extend jurisdiction into markets perhaps outside of Greece. In conclusion, we have these remarks from President Tusk of the European Council, where he sees a 1968 event coming. It may be revolutionary, and he's very concerned about people who are preaching the idea that there is an alternative economics which does not rely on austerity, but which can be more successful. And of course, if the one thing that the Greek example shows us is that austerity is an utter and consummate failure. Therefore, the idea of political changes, quite radical political changes in the short run, might indeed be quite possible. So, once again, congratulations to Professor Lapavitsas for putting this together in a way that I don't think anyone else has. Obviously, we here in the United States would be delighted to see more of this. And at the same time, the only thing to do now is to push forward along all of these fronts. So once again, I invite attention to Professor Lapavitsas' speech, and also, if I may, for my own program available at Nostimonimar in Greek and at tarpley.net in English. So that concludes this commentary from the Tax Wall Street Party of the United States, encouraging people in Greece to stay together, to maintain unity, to maintain the phalanx, but at the same time to prepare above ground and below ground, publicly and through stealth, the prerequisites for a return to the drachma. And we thank you very much, and good night.